Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blaze podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans, a Stabby Chaos Coordinator, and one Chief Shenanigator, geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Josiah DeGraff, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hi, my name is Josiah. Great to be here on with you on the podcast today.
So what can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a former high school English teacher turned fantasy author. Published my first book last year, got another book coming out this upcoming year. I've been reading fantasy and sci-fi stories since I was old enough to start getting my hands on them, and love losing myself in a good imaginative world.
So what is it that made you get sucked in first? Were you from a family of readers?
You know, it's funny. I really wasn't. My dad reads a bunch of nonfiction. It's very hard for him to read a fiction book. My mom reads a little bit more, but while none of them were the biggest readers, it was, they knew it was important for all their kids to be readers, especially in school, growing up to be able to do well in life. And they had a great habit of just regularly reading out loud to us as kids. I think that my dad's probably read more fiction aloud to us than he's read for his, for his own sake these days. And growing up, having stories regularly read to me, starting with some of George MacDonald's fiction and Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, really just instilled in me this hunger and desire to keep reading these fantastical genres.
Okay. Is there any one type of story that sucks you in the most? Do you have like favorite themes or favorite, archetypes that you really like?
One of the things that just gets me the most when I'm reading fiction is just something that's going to make me think. There are some kinds of stories that you read and they're entertaining. There's good action. There's good suspense, and I love those stories as much as the other guy. But sometimes you get to this story where it's got all that, and then it's just got this other layer that's asking big questions and making you just think more about life. The last month I was reading The Will of the Many by James Islington, and that was one of those stories for me that was just asking a lot of questions about at what point does working with an oppressive system become morally repugnant? At what points is it acceptable to do that? Because when you're living in an oppressive government, what other choice do you have other than to work with them? And it was just a fascinating exploration of those characters as the protagonist is hitting all those different moral dilemmas. So if you give me a story that has some good moral dilemmas or thematic questions that the protagonist is facing where he doesn't know the right thing to do, that's the kind of story that's going to suck me in.
So that's one of the things that makes speculative fiction such a good venue for telling a story over just straight, modern setting fiction, is that the fantastical aspects to it allow you to tackle some big issues without being too in your face, because you can be subtle about it and explore concepts without making someone feel like they're being preached at or they have to pick a side. Because, when you're talking about the reality of conquest for resources, you're not preaching at someone about the rightness of their war, because you're talking about the Na'vi, and the Na'vi aren't real. So you can speak abstractly, and it allows people to process it without getting their pride in the way you couldn't do if you just wrote, straight historical fiction or, contemporary fiction, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about the genre as well, is that very thing. In The Will of the Many, the central magic system is based around people giving up their magical energy to others to be able to use. And obviously that doesn't happen in the real world, but we do give our own work and labor and resources in other ways to people. And, but because of the fact that it's abstract into magical energies they've given, I feel like it does a good job of, as you pointed out, slipping past people's defenses and just helping us look at things without our guards up or our biases or the other things that can sometimes keep us from seeing the world clearly.
And even if the goal isn't really to change minds, because sometimes you don't need to change your mind because you're right. if nothing else, it allows you to start learning to think empathetically from the other person's point of view. Even if you still think they're wrong at the end, knowing what someone thinks and why, and being able to conceptualize that has value. And fiction teaches you how to do that you can then apply to real life, I think.
I agree. In my background as a high school English teacher, I would certainly teach plenty of books to my students that they didn't necessarily agree with. I didn't necessarily agree with as a teacher. But I did know that read these kinds of stories and just thinking about them made me a better person, even if I wasn't won over to the message of the story, or even if the story didn't have a message at all. It was just asking open-ended questions for us to wrestle with on our own. Some of my favorite stories are the ones where I might not necessarily agree with them, but I respect the questions they're working with, and I become a better person for grappling with them.
The other hard part of that is with fiction is you do have to remember, both as a reader and as a creator, that you have to put yourself in their shoes. So in history, like as a historian, we have this concept called historiography, the history of history. So it's not just what we know, because we know on, 1842, blah, 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 right? But what would the average person in 1842 have known, right? And so just because we know a thing in retrospect, it doesn't mean someone then would have known. And so it's also about understanding the contemporary thought processes of the individual characters. And sometimes the fantasy that gets hit the hardest with it, like how often are you reading a fantasy novel and they're thinking like they're in, 2025, because this episode is barely 2026 when we record it, but the 2020s urban society, and they're talking like that, but I'm like, you don't have any of those concepts to start from. Like, where's that coming from, right? And so it allows you to think, because you do have to start from the ground up and sort of create a whole worldview from the universe as described, which is fun. That's one of the things I like about fiction.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's funny you say that, because last year I was reading a book from an author I normally like, but the book just contained a lot of that, where you had all these medieval people who are suddenly using all of this very 21st century therapy speak, and it just kind of threw me a little bit out of the book. And there's a lot of other parts of the story and other books by the author I enjoyed, but I like worlds where it feels different from us, and not like you transport a bunch of 21st century Americans into a medieval fantasy world.
And you see that a lot when they talk about atrocities, because we think a shooting that has 10 dead, and that's a massacre. But in medieval times, in even the 1880s, that's not a massacre. That's just a bad day. Mm-hmm. I mean, you need a lot larger numbers for that to register in a world where life was cheap. And so then you look back, and historic exception being we called the Boston Massacre a massacre, even though not that many people died, because that word was loaded with meaning. It was propaganda, not that we said it actually was a true massacre, but words do matter. And so we use them when you're using them with modern contexts in historical settings or fantastically historic settings. You do lose some of that immersion, which is part of the fun. I want to really believe I'm riding that dragon in Pern. I don't want to think that, I'm sitting in the coffee shop in, Hampton, right? I want to suck myself in.
Right. Yeah. No, we live in a very privileged position historically here in America, and I think we too easily forget what life for most people across history and across the world is tend to be like when it comes to those kinds of atrocities, and what was historically considered to be a massacre, and what was an unfortunate but regular everyday occurrence.
And I think, I don't know, for me, being in the Army and seeing third world countries was kind of an eye-opening experience. But even without that, absent that, because not everyone has that experience, just studying the long arm of history, even just for, your casual interest, kind of shows you how different it was when life was cheaper. And I think sometimes we get horrified at some of the things that happen in fiction. And I remember that discussion coming up with the red wedding scene in the Game of Thrones series that George R. R. Martin wrote, which I know is a game of. I'm drawing a blank on the official title because Game of Thrones was the TV show.
It was what, Ice and Fire something? A Song of Ice and Fire?
Yeah, Song of Ice and Fire. There we go. But when you start understanding things from applying what we know of the real world, so the fictional world, you can have a lot more fun because it layers it in. Which is why I don't ever think AI writing is going to replace us, because it doesn't get nuance.
Right. And, I think with Martin about the fact that, he drew heavily from the British War of the Roses when writing this book. And I think you could see those historical influences throughout it and, the reality of, some of the grotesque parts of history that he's depicting in, his own fantastical way.
Yeah, you do have this concept that I learned because I was an English major in college before I had to pick just one and settle down, which is where I picked history. But this concept as readers, we call it the willing suspension of disbelief, which is like, we know dragons probably aren't breathing fire in space, but this is a fun story. And in this universe, they do. So we're just going to go with it until you break your own rules. And then, I can't suspend my disbelief anymore because you're not internally consistent. And so that's what gets most people, I think, with modern fiction, is when they forget that the fictional world is not just a hat rack for them to shoehorn all their world ideas. Even when I agree with the world ideas, like I enjoyed Ayn Rand's books, but when Terry Goodkin and the Sort of True series later on started going a little ham with it, I'm like I get it, we agree with you, but can you please stop? Like I want the story, not the preacher. All right, I want the author, not the preacher. And so it's definitely interesting to see. And I do think, being widely read, I wonder how much that's changing. So like, I'm old enough that ebooks weren't a thing when I was a kid. So, and I had a small library. And so when I ran out of books in the genre I prefer, I started reading everything else because it was there. And so I read a lot of variety of things. And I think with ebooks, you can narrow your niche so much, you're just not exposed. Like you might not ever read anything but, books about, three-legged dog vampires or whatever. I said that something like that last time as a joke, and it turned out to be really a thing. So I don't think there's a genre about three-legged dog vampires, but if there are, you're valid. But like, you can be so niche that you don't get that exposure anymore. So I wonder how that's going to change reading habits in the future.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wonder about as well with AI is whether that's going to be something that AI might end up encouraging. There are certain genres that are very trope heavy in terms of the specific tropes for how they're marketed and how readers are looking for it. I know that romance can sometimes tend to be one of those genres, and I wonder as more people try to outsource what they choose to read next to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, or insert your AI there. How much when the AI is just looking at what books have you read before? What are the books have the closest tropes to that? If there's going to be a danger of just kind of siloing ourselves just into the same kind of story over and over again, where in my mind, one of the benefits of fiction is being able to see something fresh and different. And there's tropes I like seeing as well. But I feel like we need a healthy mix of the stories that we enjoy and the kinds of stories we just haven't read before to really find the books that are going to resonate with us.
And I can count a lots of times I've read a book that I was like, yeah, it's there. I'm, sitting in the airport or whatever. This isn't what I normally read. And then I end up reading something. And I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty good. That's how I stumbled onto Clancy and Claude Cussler. That's not like I was reading historic fiction at the time. And I stumbled onto those and I'm like, well, it's here. It's not really what I'd like to read, but Grandpa had them around. And so I gave it a shot. And I'm like, holy crap, these are kind of good. And so like, that's kind of the fun of fiction is when you do sort of explore. I've come to accept because of that for me, at least, I know some people like the tropes are what gets them. For me, it's more the themes more than the tropes. Like I love the found family concept. I come from a military family. So like, that's just kind of part and parcel with the military. And sports, if you played sports growing up as well, it's kind of the same thing. I like the everyday warrior for me, like the Joe recruit as opposed to the super secret special squirrel. Just because it's more relatable, because that could be you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is the same reason that wanting to be able to insert yourself into the story that Master Chief in the games at least never takes his helmet off, because if he takes the helmet off, it's no longer you, because it's whatever John looks like. But if he leaves the helmet on, you can imagine yourself in the suit. I like that everyday soldier gives you that kind of feeling where you could imagine what would you do in this situation if you're drafted to fight the Klingons or insert random alien race, right? Like it gives you that self-insert room to kind of put yourself in their shoes, so to speak.
Yeah, you know, it's fun. It's funny. The kind of tropes that tend to attract me tend to be a little bit on the opposite side of the spectrum. Of I want to think I'm that super genius out there who just knows everything and can go do a battle of wits with the other masterminds. So I think there's a little bit of my own ego that sometimes comes out with some of the tropes I most find appealing when I pick up a book.
That's fair. I mean, we all have our own personal taste, and that's the other part of it. As readers, we bring ourselves to the story when we read the fiction.
Exactly.
And so, I think I'd read the Sword of Shannara series and all of those books in that universe many, many times, and I never grokked onto the idea that this was a post-apocalyptic United States, or just, world after technology fell, until I watched the TV series that we only got 2 seasons on, which is a shame because I really enjoyed it. And you see this aircraft carrier in one of the scenes lying on its side with branches and stuff growing over it. I'm like, what's that doing here? And then I went back and reread it. I'm like, holy crap, I missed that the whole time. Where, I didn't know. And that's kind of the fun part of that, is because I didn't expect that going in, because I wasn't even post-apoc wasn't even on my radar. I totally missed it.
That's funny.
And I think everyone does that, though. You bring your own biases and your own worldviews into a story. At the start, at least. I
remember having one of that mind-blowing realization when I was in college, and I was in literary theory and criticism, and reading an essay by someone who was talking about the fact that each reader experiences a book differently because we're all bringing our own imaginations to it. We're picturing the scene differently, and so no two readers are really going to ever have the same experience reading a story. And I'd never quite thought about it that way before. And it kind of just blew my mind, both as a storyteller and as a reader, to realize, how much that's the case, and how much a good story really is a bit of a conversation between both the author and the reader. It's not just the author dictating the whole thing.
Which you start realizing more when you get involved in, I don't want to say fandom because that's a loaded word, but fan spaces where fans of various books talk to each other. I imagine if people still did the book clubs like they used to back in the day, you'd get that same experience where when you talk to people, you all read the same book, and then you talk about wait, did you read what I read? Because I didn't catch that, and that's part of the fun.
Yeah,
I think of talking to other people that are reading the same thing as you. Especially if it's good, because then you can nerd out with people that are on your wavelength.
Mm-hmm. And one of my, I'm in I say I'm in a book club. I don't know if my fellow book club members would say that, because I am not the most consistent attendee, you might say. But one of the things I love about going to book club is particularly the times when we choose a book, I'm reading it. It's not the kind of book I'd normally read. I don't really care all that much for it. But then I go to the book club, I start discussing it with others, and I realize, these people got a lot more out of the book than I did. They saw things I didn't see. And even if I don't leave the book club loving the book, I can at least emerge with a greater appreciation for it, for what other people saw while doing it. And I think the communal aspect of reading, when you're able to find other people who read the same things, or you're just in a book club, so you're making each other read the kinds of books you like, I really appreciate that part of the experience, and hearing other people's perspectives with the same story.
And that's the good thing with social media, gives you the ability to find people on your wavelength to have those digital book clubs. But there's still nothing like sitting in a room with someone and being able to read their body language when they get all excited about, and this one thing happened, and I was like, well, that's kind of fun too. You're able to read their body language when they get excited, about the big reveal that they may or may not have seen coming. That's always fun. So we are 20 minutes in, and I have not asked you the religion question. So we're going to do that before I forget, because we're going to talk about your book, The Study of Shattered Spells, in a few minutes. So because we have to do this, I'm going to ask you, are you ready for this, sir?
I am very ready to name my religion.
All right, Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly.
I'm going to have to go Star Wars. I do love Firefly, but there's something about the breadth of Star Wars that, I hear the theme music and it just gets me every time.
Or you see the scroll going up the screen like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know exactly what time it is. All right.
You know it.
And because we are polytheistic here at the Blasphemous Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia.
I am sorry to say that I've only read one book each of Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time. I might eventually get into them a bit more, but the size just intimidates me. So I'm going to have to go Chronicles of Narnia just because I have read the whole series. It helps that they're short, and I read them when I was younger and had a little bit more time on my hands.
Yeah, and we did kind of pick these because they're the various mediums. So they've got books, movies, comics, graphic novels. Like they're in all the mediums. So we can kind of meet our audience where they are. That's why the choices we picked are what we did, and they're kind of iconic. Obviously, we used to have Lord of the Rings, but everyone picked that one, so we had to take it off the list because it got boring. Okay, this is the part where everyone says they like Lord of the Rings, and so we kind of took it off the list. But I figured Chronicles of Narnia. The Chronicles of Narnia was a good substitute because it was contemporary to Tolkien.
Right.
Although that's been a suggested episode is who the spiritual successor to Tolkien is, because if he's the grandfather of modern fantasy fiction, like who's the next step for him? And I'm like, yeah, we might as well just call that episode Nerd Fight. Some of our readers or some of our listeners have suggested that as a topic a couple times over the last couple of years. And I'm like, is that the kind of drama you want? Because we did an interview season 1 of Sci-Fi Shenanigans, where we reviewed the Starship Troopers movie and the book separate. And I mentioned that I liked one more than the other. And I still get hate mail about that because people are passionate, right? Like, so, yeah, it's one of those things where you just got to be careful.
All I know is that controversy sells, and I would listen the heck out of an episode of people fighting about who the spiritual succession of Tolkien was. So
yeah, I'd probably get to figure out.
It sounds up my alley.
I got to get together. I know we did a review that just launched at the day we were recording this of Enemy Mine, the classic movie with Louis Gossett Jr. And Michael LaVoice and I went at it because we both had different opinions on the movie. And we had to make ourselves stop because I don't want to say we're getting heated because we weren't taking it that seriously, but we're like, oh crap, we gotta let other people talk because we were just arguing back and forth, which continued in the post show, by the way.
Nice, excellent.
Those could be kind of fun, right?
That's what makes a good movie discussion in my book. If you all agree on it, like you don't have much to say. It's when you guys disagree on something that you're able to go at it and have a great discussion about the film.
The problem is up until recently when we've been trying to really hard to stick under an hour and a half, oftentimes our movie review episodes ended up being longer than the movie itself. Even standard, 2-hour length movies because, we had opinions.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Checks out.
So one of the crying shames of adulthood is we do stop asking each other the important question. And thanks to the generosity of our sponsors, we are bringing this back. And I'm going to ask you, sir, what is your favorite dinosaur?
I'm going to have to go with the Triceratops because of the fact that, it's an herbivore, it's a gentle creature, but it's also got those horns and that spiked tail, and it means business. And if you pick a fight with it, it's going to be able to defend itself. So Triceratops is going to be my choice for my favorite dinosaur.
Okay. Now you say it's a herbivore. Are you a vegetarian? Is that why that resonated?
No, I'm not vegetarian. I don't know. So, something about the carnivorous, dangerous, herbivores. It's like you could be friendly with them. Like I could be friends with the Triceratops. I'm not going to try to be friends with the raptor. I've seen too many Jurassic Park films to make that mistake. So, I like preserving my own life. That's why I like the Triceratops.
That's fair. Okay, so. With that, we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer Knuckle Dragon Troglodytes. So, coffee or tea, and how do you take it, sir?
So, I am definitely a tea guy. Take it with maybe a little bit of sugar, but sometimes just take it plain. I feel like you put cream or you put too much sugar in it, and you're just missing the flavor. So, I like to experience the full flavor there.
Now, does that change for you, like what you drink and when by season? Because according to your bio, you're up in Pennsylvania where it gets really cold and it's probably still snowing there in February. So does that change your take?
Yeah, I will say that we do still have snow on the ground from the latest snowstorm that came in, 4 weeks ago or so at this point. And that has changed. I used to live down in North Carolina, and I didn't drink very much tea down in North Carolina because we didn't really have real winters. But after coming up here with very much having very real winters and long winters at that, I did become a tea drinker. I do drink tea a lot more often in the fall and winter than I do in the summer.
Okay, do you do the iced tea as well, or is it just always hot?
I will do iced tea. That is one of the things that I do think the Southerners got right is with the sweet tea. So I'm not, if the tea's ice, I'm not a big fan of unsweetened iced tea. If it's gonna be iced tea, it's gonna have to be sweet as well. So I do believe in lots of sugar with my iced tea.
When I was in the Carolinas, we used to call that table wine, sweet tea.
Yep.
Now, obviously, we're here, and then in a few minutes we're going to air this commercial, and we're going to jump in. But we're here because you are an author. This is your debut novel, but nobody wakes up one day and says, "You know what? I've never read a book. I don't like reading books, but I want to be an author." So, how did you develop your love of reading, and how did that transition into not only do I want to read the stories, I want to tell my own?
Yeah. So, my parents grew up, doing a lot of read aloud stories for us. And that was one of the things that, first developed in me a love of reading. And, as soon as I was able to do it myself and not have to wait for mom and dad to read chapter 6 for me, I could do it myself. That was a game changer for my own reading habits. And then for writing, because of the fact that I enjoyed listening to stories so much, when I was about, 5 or 6 years old, about the time that I was first able to really start picking up a pen and try to write something, I was making my own little picture books and coming up with my own stories of what I wanted to write. And it was one of those things that I enjoyed doing it as a very young kid. And the older I grew, it was one of those things I just never managed to outgrow. And eventually I realized, well, if I still like doing this, maybe I should start looking at this as a potential career and try to pursue this professionally. So that's a journey that led me to eventually publish my first book last year.
Now, did you get into other forms of storytelling, like were you tabletop games, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I did some D&D campaigns back when I was down in North Carolina. Unfortunately, the group that I was with fell apart, and I've not quite been able to find another group since then. But I did have a blast playing those every Saturday night with my Dwarven Druid and Elven Ranger characters.
Okay. Well, we did promise that we would get started talking about your book, dear listener. So we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man and the woman. And then when we come back, we will talk about the book that brought us here. So let me pull up that commercial.
The necromantic magic of the Great Lich has held sway over the world for 100 years. Can a young knight of the god of death and the last priestess of the goddess of life destroy him before their homeland falls? The only survivor of his convoy, journeyman knight Darian, is entrusted with an ancient scroll and one mission: return the scroll to the High Temple in Hothan, no matter the cost. He never expected that journey to include stumbling onto the last healer in the world. Now he must take not only the scroll but the woman across the kingdom to safety, each step dogged by the relentless undead. Death's Knight, Book 1 in the completed War of the Lich series by Matthew T. Summers and Jenna Ray.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And now we are here to talk with Josiah about his book titled A Study of Shattered Spells. So one of the things that the listeners that we have like to do before we get started on a story, because we do have some families that listen, is they want to know what the rating of this story would be. So if you're using something like a movie rating that everyone's familiar with, I know this is labeled as Christian fiction, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's appropriate for all ages.
No,
Christian, as I understand it, Christian fiction is just the overall themes, not necessarily how those themes are portrayed.
Yeah, that's correct. So I would rate it to be a PG-13 or so. It's not necessarily clean fiction per se, depending on how you define it. But it does keep things at a PG-13 level.
I imagine if you're calling it Christian fiction, you probably are going to not go too gratuitous on, the naughtier side of things, but that still doesn't necessarily mean just because you don't have that it's appropriate for all ages. Like you could have combat scenes in there that you wouldn't want your 5-year-old to read and still have it be, Christian fiction, because, there are plenty of conversion stories that happened on battlefields. And so that's why I was asking, because, it's for some people, they think religious fiction and instantly, you're reading about the Amish or something, right? And like, that's just not always the case.
No, I like there to be a little bit more spark and drama and stuff in the stories I read. Not that if you're into Amish fiction, nothing wrong with you. It's just not my personal cup of tea on that front.
And that's apparently a thriving genre in the indie market. Not enough to support it in the trad pub world, but there are plenty of people writing Amish romance. My question is, if you're writing or reading Amish romance, how do you know if it's a candlelight dinner or just a regular dinner? Inquiring minds want to know. That's right up there with all these people that do sci-fi where robots take over everything, so people are put out of work. Okay, well then how do your customers buy your stuff if they don't have any money? Because they don't have any job. It's one of those things you just got to wonder.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent a whole summer living in Amish country in Pennsylvania, and never once thought to ask the Amish their thoughts on candlelit dinners and if that's any different from the normal. So I missed my chance to ask them that question.
We can forgive you. Next time you talk to them, though, make sure you ask. We have Mennonites near us, which they're not quite the same thing, but they also use technology, so they would have lights.
Right.
And given how old-fashioned the Amish are, you would think that was the start, and then the Mennonites are the offshoot. It's the other way around. They looked at the Mennonite simple life, and they're like, it's not simple enough. You know what would be cooler than lights? Candlelight.
That's fascinating. I have not looked much into the history of the Mennonites and the Amish, but that does sound like a fascinating well to get lost into some afternoon.
So I was shocked because, I went to grad school in Pennsylvania, and so I didn't realize the Pennsylvania Dutch were not, in fact, Dutch. They were German, Deutsch. And so as part of that, you've got Amish country, and I did a few ceremonial honor guards for World War II veterans that passed away that happened to live near Amish country. And so, we went there to do the honor guard because they didn't have surviving family members. And so we ran into some of the Amish. We had one try to street race us in his horse and buggy when my buddy was driving his, convertible, because that happened to be his car, and we were taking our personal vehicles to go to this funeral. So it's an interesting time to deal with them. You never quite know what you're going to get, but it's definitely not what you would expect if you believe the TV. Like, they're aware of the rest of the world. They just choose not to live in it. So it's definitely interesting. I've thought about using that as the nexus for certain urban fantasy. It could be interesting to see how that intersects, or seeing about how that would play into some post-apocalyptic world, because for them nothing changes. Unless it's zombies, what's changes for them. But anyway, all right. So we wanted to talk about your book, because we could go down the rabbit holes, because your mind is as nimble as mine. We think about all the things and go all the rabbit holes, which is probably why you were good in school and why sometimes real life gets in the way. So it's a PG-13 story. Can you give us the Reader's Digest, the elevator pitch, a summary of what a study of shattered spells is?
Yeah, so it's a traditional magic school story that's told from the teacher's perspective, where a brand new teacher is given 8 months to train a prophesied hero. If he isn't prepared at the end of the 8 months, their country is going to fall to an army of human sacrificers. And when she comes to the school, she realizes not only is this hero woefully underprepared, but she has to deal with a corrupt administration, other teachers who wish they were the one training the prophesied hero instead of her, and a whole lot of other shenanigans that have been hidden under the surface, and is trying to figure out how she juggles all of that while making sure that this prophesied hero is ready in 8 months to save their nation and ultimately save her husband as well.
Okay. Most of the Academy type stories are very much in the YA space, and it's from the kid's point of view. Would you consider this a YA novel, or is the prophesized one an adult?
I would consider it to be an adult novel. I have heard from several teens who have read the book and enjoyed it as well, so I think it has some crossover, but I intentionally wanted to do something different, partially because of my own experiences as a high school English teacher. I was tired of reading stories where the teachers were either just, the enemies in the story, or they sometimes did a few things, but really weren't that helpful to the kids in question. And, I get it. When you're writing YA, you got to make the teens the heroes, and you got to do something with the teachers so they aren't stealing the show. But I was curious as a teacher, I think about, well, what would it look like if a teacher was dealing with some of these things that happened in YA magic school novels, and how would the story be different? And that was the original inspiration for this book.
That gets you thinking about all the times you've got, teachers that taught people that later go on to do great things, like, specifically either you're thinking in sports or whatever. I'm like, do the people around them know at the time that these people were going to ascend to the next level? Like, I wonder, did Michael Jordan's basketball, teachers know he was going to be the basketball legend that he became? Or, insert any other famous person whose special skill set made them rich and famous. And to think about like what that would look like from the other side of that equation, from the trainer, the teacher, is definitely an interesting twist on it that I don't think I've seen a lot of people do.
Yeah, it's funny. That was one of the things that I found most disappointing in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. There's a lot of gripes that people can have with the prequel trilogy, but for me, one of the most interesting things is, what does it look like to be Obi-Wan and you're training Anakin and you're told that, he's a chosen one, he's the one who's going to unite the Force. Like, what kind of pressure do you have to have on your shoulders to know that you're responsible for training the boy who's going to do all of that? It was one of the things I wish that the prequels explored more. And that was certainly something else I wanted to look into this book, because, it's not just, this, your student could become Michael Jordan. It's like, what if you knew you were training Michael Jordan? Like, what kind of pressure do you feel? How does that change the way you approach teaching when you know that the kid you're teaching is going to grow up and do something great?
That can either make you a little bit lazy because they've got the raw skills already there, or make you go extra crazy on them and try even harder. There's no middle ground, I don't think, in that one. There's extremes.
No, I agree. You can't be moderate when it comes to that kind of thing.
So we danced around this a little bit. We did specify that this is considered Christian fiction. So is this one where the Christianity is allegorical, a la Chronicles of Narnia, or is this very on the nose with the religious angle?
Yeah, so I'd say that tends to be rather subtle. The characters in the story are religious, but many of the the themes of the story are less about trying to proselytize or evangelize, and more just looking at how do people in religious communities handle specific challenges. So one of the challenges that the teacher has to deal with at the school is the challenge of abuse, when she's seeing different students who are abused and having to figure out what does it look like to protect them and to stand up for some of these kids who are just being abused or bullied by other students. And one of the things that I've experienced myself as a Christian is that the way that religious people deal with say questions of abuse tends to be a little bit different from the way that the general culture handles it. There are some positive things about that, in my opinion, but there are also some negative things, because religious communities, we tend to be close-knit, we tend to be naturally trusting of each other, and that can create challenges when you don't want to believe that bullies are out there or bad people exist, at least not when they're in your circles. And so there are different questions like that that is interested in exploring in this story. When you have a bunch of characters in this story who are religious and are trying to grapple with some of these different challenges, in a way that felt authentic to those characters in the story and how they believe and approach the world.
Do you think that this, like a lot of times when you talk genres that are specifically one specific religion, they tend to self-select for people that are already believers, right? Because if the assumption is if you don't already believe, you're going to get preached at. Do you think someone who's coming at it from a different faith than Christianity or with no faith at all could read this and just accept it as it is a academy story without potentially seeing the underlying religious themes?
That was my goal when I set out to write it. And, one of one of the avid readers I've heard from who, was one of the first people to read the book and, absolutely fell in love with it, is someone who, they're not a Christian themselves. I think they'd probably describe themselves as a bit more agnostic. But they just enjoyed spending time in the world and these characters and following them along. So I tried to write it in a way where you don't need to come from a religious background in order to appreciate the story and everything that happens in it.
Okay, because people kind of want to know where the entry point is if it's going to be something they could potentially enjoy. For instance, we mentioned Chronicles of Narnia. I read that several times before I realized it was supposed to be a religious allegory.
Oh, no way.
Right. I read it as a kid. It was just a fun story. And so I think, you can do stuff that technically that might have religious worldview overtones without it necessarily being obvious unless you're looking for it. Although people looking for it can see it in everything. Like I've met people that try to tell me the movie Gladiator was a religious story. I'm like, no, it was literally a gladiator story. Don't overthink it. And so it's one of those things where you're dancing on a knife's edge trying to service specifically those interested in religious fiction and those people who just want a good story and maybe, don't fit the demographic, but would be willing to give it a shot. So obviously, I know that this is available in audiobook. So if you're listening, reading with your ears, that's available. Right now, this says it's book 1 in the Chintor. Is that right? Chintor's Legacy?
Shintor's Legacy, yeah.
How long do you see this series going on? Has this got a defined arc where it's going to be X number of books, or is it going to be open-ended?
It's a defined arc. So it's going to be 3 books total. Already have the whole trilogy plotted out. The second book will be coming out next year and got a pretty definitive plan for it. So it'll be 3 books. Not going to split the final book in 2 as some other authors do. And if you've got the audience and the story for that, nothing wrong with that. But I'm pretty committed to keeping this a trilogy.
Okay. There is arc creep where you can have to get the ideas in there that they can expand. But even if that happens, if you know exactly where the end point is, we're not talking about an open-ended series where you're 100 books in, like some of these Royal Road lit RPG style stories that are, 4 million words and counting, right? Like it's not going to be one of those numbers.
Yeah, and part of it is, I just know that I don't have the patience for those kinds of stories. Like if I had all the time in the world, I might be spending more time on Royal Road, reading The Wandering Inn and all these other books that are super, super long. But that's not the kind of reader that I am. So I try to write the kinds of stories that I'm most drawn to reading is ones where I know it's going to be this certain amount of books for a certain amount of time, and it's not necessarily going to be dozens of book commitment unless I'm really feeling inspired or in the mood for that kind of thing.
Yeah. And a lot of people have been burned by authors that had long or ongoing series that they never finished. And so people are a little gun shy. There's a reason sales spike when you got that completed on your series page. So on the cover, as we're looking at it, it's got a lot more of a classic vibe. I like the look of it, but it's got an instrument. It looks like it's either a viola or a violin. You can't tell on the image. What is the story of the musical instrument as part of the cover? That is an interesting choice for a fantasy novel. Yeah.
So the way that magic works in this particular world, because it is set at a battle mage academy, so we spend a lot of time with mages in the story. Is it's a world where mages use musical instruments in order to do their magic. So violin players are able to summon lightning. Lutists are able to do telekinesis. Flutists are able to control water. And so the way that the magic works is you have all these competing musicians that are playing their tunes and trying to control the different elements of the world. And one of the catches of the magic system is that if your musical instrument breaks in any way while you're playing, whether that's because someone shot an arrow at it or one of the strings snapped or anything else, the musical instrument explodes because of all the magical energies going through it. And so having a shattered instrument like the violin on the cover is a very dangerous spot to be in, and the one thing that all mages need to avoid. So I won't say why there's a shattered violin on the cover, but listeners can draw their own conclusions about some of the threats that some of these mages are facing as they're trying to play their musical instruments to go to war.
So what made you decide to use music as the magic? That is, I don't think I've seen anybody do that since what's that Mickey Mouse Fantasia show? Like,
oh yeah. I did grow up watching Fantasia, and that was one of the earliest movies I feel like I saw. But a lot of it came down to the fact is, back when I was in high school, I played the piano a lot. And it was when I was playing the piano a lot that I just got to think about just how powerful music is. The fact that it really does, move our emotions when we're listening to, and just feeling that power and that energy. Whenever I was playing the piano. And that's why the idea first percolated in my brain that it would be really fun to write a fantasy series where musical instruments actually can do magic. And at the time, I was like, that's a fun idea, but it doesn't work for this story, and didn't work for the next few other stories I was working on either. But it was one of those ideas I just kept in the back of my mind as something that I wanted to do someday. And so then when I came up with the idea for this battle mage story told from the teacher's perspective that I wanted to write, that was the moment I was like, finally, this is a story that this concept was waiting for. So it was really my time playing musical instruments as a teen that I wanted to harken back to when coming up with that aspect of the story.
Okay. So one of the things fantasy is known for, fantasy novels, are maps in the stories. Is that something you included, like map of the realm in the?
I don't feel like I'd be a good fantasy author if I didn't include a map. There's actually 2 different maps in the story. But I made sure that at least one that was, couldn't find any way around that. I need to have it at least for my own sake, if not for my readers.
Yeah, I'm with you. I enjoy the maps of these fantasy worlds, and then I can picture yourself there. So, how long?
Honestly, I was just gonna say, and honestly, that's one of the things that makes me struggle, in particular with ebooks for fantasy. I don't know how you are with ebooks, but one of the challenges I have whenever I'm reading a fantasy ebook that has a map is that you can't just flip it to the front like you can a paperback or a hardcover. We're trying to see, okay, where are the characters now? Where are they going? That's why I like my old-fashioned print books, is the ability to quickly flip to the map and keep myself on track as I'm reading through a story.
I actually read the ebooks because I can magnify the heck out of it. It's a good way to get around my head injury. That's nice. Also why my preference is audio, just as another aside. But sure. So you mentioned that this is rated PG-13 and that it is religious fiction, but how long is it? Because there are some people that are capable of reading at a level above their, patience and emotional maturity. So when we're talking about this novel, is it, how long is the book?
Yeah, it's about 350 pages long. So it is not a Brandon Sanderson-esque tome. Try to keep it on the shorter end while still being a full novel.
So it's about 100,000 words roughly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. What can you tell us about the teacher that's the main character? Or you mentioned it was a she because you said she had a husband. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she was originally a researcher who was drafted into the battlefield when the war erupted between the 2 countries, and she's someone who's always been insecure about herself, and never quite felt like she belonged. And right before the story opens, her husband is actually put into a coma because of a magical explosion that happens on the battlefield. And suddenly, for the first time, she finds herself fending for herself and trying to win the war, both for winning the war for her country and because the best healers are kidnapped and locked behind enemy lines. And so she's going to have to win the war if she's going to see her husband revive from the magical coma that he's in. And so, when she first starts teaching, she doesn't feel terribly confident. She never trained for being a teacher. She never particularly liked being around other kids as a teen. And so a lot of it is a learning experience for her as she feels like the fish out of water, who is also now tasked with training the prophesied hero. And she doesn't quite know why she was chosen, because she knows she's not the most experienced teacher. And yet the head mage of the school chose her anyways. And that's one of the many secrets that she's going to be unraveling when she's at the school and realizing just how much really happens at the school that's supposed to be the best mage academy in the story.
Okay, so what can you tell us about the world where this story is taking place?
Yeah, so it takes place in a jungle-inspired setting. There's multiple different kingdoms in the world, but most of the other kingdoms have been taken over by the blossoming Chaldean Empire that Kalina, our protagonist, and her country is putting up their last final stand against. So most of the story takes place at this mage school that's at the edge of the deep jungle. The people in this world don't spend much time venturing too far into the jungle because that's where the elves live, and very few people who see an elf live to return and tell the tale about it. And so it's on the edge of the jungle, up on the cliffs, as they're preparing their students for war.
I'm with you. I'm generally team dwarf. I'm not a fan of elves.
It is too, I don't know, maybe it's a bit influenced by the stories I read, but my internal view of an elf tends to be, arrogant, a little bit hoity-toity. A dwarf, it feels like the sort of person I could just, chillax with, crack open a beer at the end of the day and just have a good time without worrying if I'm being secretly judged for my decisions.
And even if they are secretly judging you, you could judge them back because, they're dwarves.
Exactly. Judgment all around.
That's right. Mutually assured judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the main character. Are there any secondary characters that stand out in this novel?
Yeah, so one of the main secondary characters is going to be the prophesied hero himself. His name is Emil. Emil, has grown up his whole life, being told that he is the prophesied hero who's going to save the nation. But the prophecy also says that in the process of saving his nation, he's going to die and lose his life in the process. And so because of that, he hasn't really had a normal childhood. He's had all these pressures on him his whole life. He knows that he's going to die young. And he kind of has this sneaking feeling that most people around him just care about him because he's going to save them. He has trouble trusting that people are really his friends just for his own sake, and not just friends because he's someone famous and someone that they hope to get something out of. So by the time the story begins, he's got a lot of challenges going on in his life because of all of that. He wants to be looked up to and lauded as this noble hero. And yet he's afraid about how many people are actually his friends and how many people are just admirers, flatterers, or sycophants. So there's a lot that Kalina has to learn about him and what his true motivations are and who he really is over the course of the story. But let's just say there's a lot going on in his life that a teen boy his age shouldn't normally have to deal with.
So he's not being raised so much as he's being indoctrinated, so he'll willingly make that sacrifice.
Oh, yes, because if he decides that he's going to shirk his calling, if he decides, I just want to live a long life, see the rest of you, the whole country is put on the line. So everyone in his life is very incentivized to make sure that he is ready and willing to die for everyone else.
So is he the messianic Christ-like figure then, since it's religious fiction?
I'm going to say that that's a large part of what the story is about. I'd say that most people in the story want him to be this noble, messianic, Christ-like figure who sacrifices himself for everyone else. But that's not really who he wants to be. And he kind of feels like this whole sacrifice thing is a little bit of a sham, that people want him to sacrifice, but they're not willing to make sacrifices of his own. So one of the things that the story wrestles with is, all those dynamics. Is it right to be looking to other people to demand these kinds of sacrifices of them? And I'm not going to say where the story ends up on that, but that is one of the big questions that the story grapples with him as a character.
That is something you see a lot in military fiction too, because oftentimes the people voting to send young men and women to war are not the ones who have to go to the front lines. And so this volunteering hard things for other people that you won't do yourself is an ongoing theme. So I do think it's a very compelling argument because it comes down to essentially agency. Where is the line where he gets to pick for himself versus where the world or his family or, insert random forces is picking for him? And at what point in time does he decide to, or she decide to choose for themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not really true self-sacrifice if someone else is choosing it for you. You've got to be the one who has the ability to say no and to take control of your own life for it to really be self-sacrifice as opposed to someone else just punishing you or using you for their own ends.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story. So what can you tell us about the empire they're at war with and the prophecy that he's supposed to be the prophesized one for?
Yeah, so the empire that he's fighting against is the Chaldean Empire. The story is set about the cusp of the Renaissance age. So we're in a midst of a technological renovation where gunpowder is beginning to be introduced, and one of the main advantages that the Chaldeans have is they have the only source of gunpowder in the region, and so Kalina and her country is fighting against them with pikes and cavalry and traditional medieval weapons, while they're being attacked with early types of guns that exist in the world. So they're at a little bit of a technological disadvantage. It's one of the things that's enabled the Chaldeans to blossom into an empire, and one of the big reasons why they need a prophesied hero in the first place, because they're going up against a foe that if they don't have a prophesied hero defending them, they're not going to be able to win against that kind of technological imbalance. And so they're going to need to rely on this prophecy that says that this boy will save them if he's ready, willing to fight and trained in order to go against an empire that has guns when they don't.
So what made you decide to blend the Renaissance era with magic?
I've always just been captured by the Renaissance era when it comes to history. Whether it's the kind of art that you had, the sculptures, all of the art side of that, but also just the idea that you finally have so much technological progress happening in a short time when we haven't before. Maybe some of it is inspired by feeling like we're living through a little bit of an accelerated age like that ourselves with all the technological developments that are happening. But I think that when technologies begin to change, and when the power structures begin to change with it, and who has power and who doesn't changes as underdogs suddenly come in possession of significant technologies that changes the game, it just creates a sense of dynamism and change that's fascinating. And I'm also just generally intrigued as a reader by stories where magic is powerful, but it's not the be all end all. And when you have a society like this where you can have these magical instruments that can do all these sorts of things, but boy, you shoot one of these instruments with a gun and the mage isn't going to be all that effective because magic is fast, but at least in this world, it's not quite fast enough in order to stop bullets. It just creates an interesting play of different kinds of power that people can throw at each other. And that's one of the things that made it a lot of fun to write in this world. And one of the things that attracted me to giving this a bit of a Renaissance era of technology kind of aesthetic.
So with that being said, what's the culture like then? Because the Renaissance culture is going to be different than standard fantasy culture. And like we talked about in the beginning, like if you want the story to be believable, you have to write the culture that fits with the location and the time. So what's the culture like in Caledonia, which by the way sounds very Celtic? New Caledonia, Caledonian Legion, like it's.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not particularly inspired or connected to Celtish, Celtic culture or anything like that. So I think that's a fun coincidence more than anything else. It's hard. I don't know about you. I always find it hard to really define a culture, because a culture in my mind is sometimes you can define it, but sometimes you really understand a culture by by living in it and experiencing what it's like. So I can say in broad terms that the culture of the world is, everyone is very religious. Now, there's lots of different religions that exist in this world. The religion of Rezaid, where Kalina lives in, is different from the religion of Chaldea and the people that they're fighting against. So there's religious tension that's going on. It tends to be a world where there's a lot of deference and respect for authority. You don't just be a rebel. This is not like American culture where we tend to celebrate the rebels, the people who are willing to dare and defy the authorities that be, to go out and conquest or adventure or do the right thing. It's a kind of a world where that's very frowned upon, and where people are expected to always be doing whatever the authorities tell them, whether that's the right approach or not. And it's also a world that's influenced by being surrounded by a lot of jungles, a lot of dangerous locations around them. It's a little bit more spread out with different pockets of cities throughout the country of Rezaid that each kind of have a culture and a place of their own. So, I don't know if I'm the best person to describe culture, because it's something that, at least for me, I feel like I experience, know that I know how to put words to, but those would be some of the different ways that I would describe the culture of the world.
Okay, now what does the map of the world look like? Is it basically Earth repurposed, or did you come up with a whole new geography and topography for this setting?
Now, I came up with a whole new geography and topography for this setting. I did make sure to brush up on my old Earth science textbook from college when putting it together. So I wasn't doing things with the map that you're going to look at. I'm like, that's not going to be geographically possible to just have this random desert here next to the random marshes or wetlands or anything like that. But you kind of have half of the country that's or half of the world, the countries in question that are near the mountains. You've got the rain shadow effect. You've got tons of jungles and that kind of aesthetic, and then you kind of have the other half that's a bit further out from the mountains and the rain shadow. You got some grasslands there, but you also have parts that are a bit more barren. That's also one of the inspirations for why the Chaldean Empire is so intent on conquering the rest of them, is a reason to get better land than some of the land that they're situated with there.
Okay. What can you tell us about the antagonist? Is it the world itself? Is it specifically the enemy empire?
Yeah, that's one of the things I had a fun time playing with in the story, because at the beginning, you were like, well, who are the villains? Well, it's the Chaldean Empire that's coming to destroy Rezaid and Kalina, and that's the enemy that all the characters in the story are talking about. That's the enemy that Kalina is most concerned with, is how are we going to beat them? But then once she gets to Shintor Academy, and when she begins to try and train the prophesied hero, what she ends up realizing is that sometimes the enemies from within are worse than the enemies from outside. Because the enemies are within are the ones that you think are your allies. And you're trusting them to be on your side and on the same page. And one of the things she begins to realize over the course of the story is that some of the people that she's leaning on and looking to as friends really have their own goals in mind. Maybe it's their own egos that they value the most. Maybe it's something else that they value the most. There's a lot of secrets that are going on, and a lot of hidden agendas. And a large part of the story is her trying to unravel all these hidden agendas in order to figure out both what's going on and how can she still save the country from the penultimate threat when not everyone is on the same page and working together to stop this threat as she originally thought they were, or like they claimed to be to her.
Okay, is there anything more about this novel that we can talk about without spoilers? Because obviously we don't want spoilers.
No, I think for me, one of the things that was, one of the inspirations for me, one of the things I enjoyed putting the most on the page is just exploring the other side of the magic school teacher's desk and what it looked like. One of the things I discovered when I became a teacher was how much happened at school that the average student doesn't know about. Whether that's the internal school politics and the fighting between teachers, whether that's the conversations that teachers are having about students when all the students are outside of the room, and the things that students never know about. I was curious to explore, as we've got a teacher who's training a prophesied hero, not just what is the actual experience of training him looks like, but what does it look like when she is brainstorming with other teachers? How do we best train him? What does it look like when she's clashing with other teachers about the best way to train him? About when the administration is giving her certain objectives and things they want her to be doing to train him, when she knows that's not actually the right way to teach him, and all the things that as students we wondered about when we were in school, but never had a chance to be able to glimpse ourselves. I want to give a little glimpse into what the other side of the teacher's desk looked like, albeit in a fantastical magic school setting where there's a lot of other things going on. And that was one of the things that I've heard from multiple readers that they've been able to enjoy, as well as just seeing all the things that happen at magic school that you don't normally get to see on your standard magic school dark academia novel.
So would you consider this dark academia or no?
I would consider it dark academia. Dark academia is a bit of a broad genre. There's a lot of different things that can fit in, and some things are more on the edges, and some things are more solidly, fully dark academia. I'd say the study of shattered spells is halfway there. You've got a lot of the things in the story that align with other dark academia stories, like some of the gothic nature of some of the tone of it, some of the darkness that the protagonist is wrestling with, along with the theme of kind of just interrogating and questioning power that's in a lot of dark academia novels. Now, obviously, the standard dark academia novel is you're going to be rather British coded. It's going to have a lot of classical allusions and allegories, and this is set in a jungle in a secondary world, so it doesn't have all the same aesthetic vibes of dark academia, but a lot of the other tropes and themes do align with a traditional dark academia novel.
Okay, we talked about the combat, and we talked about essentially the war mages, but we didn't discuss the type of combat. So Renaissance era also had naval combat that was pretty gritty and could have been a setting that would be fun to explore. But is yours mostly ground-based, or are there nautical themes as well?
It's mostly ground-based. While there is a naval part of the battle that's going on, I chose to just focus on the land-based fighting, which traditionally with the two countries at this time has normally been largely battles between pikemen with cavalry assisting. Obviously, some of those tactics are changing a bit now that we've got early versions of rifles that are on the scene. But that's a kind of atmosphere that is depicting in the land battles in the story.
Okay. Right now, this is the debut novel. The first book is out. When can we expect the follow-on novels?
Yeah, so the second novel is going to be coming out next year in 2027. So readers can be keeping an eye out in 2027 as the story of Shintor's legacy continues.
Okay. And is that going to be audiobook as well? Is that something you're going to do with the whole trilogy?
Yep, the whole trilogy is going to have audiobooks as well. So that's a commitment I've made with this series.
Okay. This is the part then, dear listener, where I will remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. It really does matter to do your part, especially with a debut author like Josiah. So where might listeners and readers and viewers at home find your social media links? And as usual, it will be in the show notes.
Yep. So they can search me up, Josiah DeGraff, on their favorite social media platform. I guess I should probably be more specific. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as Threads. There are other social media platforms that I'm not on. If you're on one of those platforms, you can find me there, or you can visit my website at astudyofshatteredspells.com.
All right. And you can find us, a dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChute, the Rumble, the YouTube, the TikTok, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until they get high on their own supply. If you want some of that coffee brand coffee, the link is in the show notes. The discount code is Podcast Grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time. We'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on, Josiah. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. An honor and pleasure to be on and be chatting about all these things with you.
It was very difficult because I keep wanting to ask spoiler questions, and while I don't care, most of my listener base would be sending me lots of hate mail, so I had to stop myself. I realized our transition at the end on this one was a little bit abrupt, but I'm like, I better stop myself before I walk into spoiler territory. So this sounds like a fun book, though, and I'll have to give it a listen over there on the Audible, which will be linked in the show notes as well, because this is on several platforms. For those of you that shop outside the Amazon ecosystem, it is available on those venues as well. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it.